It is time for a destruction tier list for Master Mode Oblivion Remastered. Now, what we're looking at are how good the effects are on spells. Obviously, there's different forms of these effects through enchantments, through scrolls, potions, and so on. But mostly this is for spells and spell making. So the first effect we have is damage fatigue. Now, damage fatigue can knock enemies over, and it can be pretty good in that way. I consider this to be strong. Some people might consider this to be S tier. The reason I consider it strong is because in order for it to be good, you generally want to ramp it, and if you're ramping destruction magic, you can just simply kill the enemy. So this could be good for crowd control with ramping, if that's the use case, but even then, you can kill things so quickly with 2 to 3 ramps. Ramps meaning weakness stacks, like weakness to fire, weakness to magic, cast those in sequence. So I don't really think it's overpowered because you can just simply kill the enemies instead of knocking them over. Damage health I also think is A tier. The cost of damage health is quite high relative to other forms of damage. The upside of this thing is that it can deal damage to things through resistance outside of magic. So if something has like resistance to fire or shock or frost, it just deals consistent damage. However, it cannot be ramped as highly as these effects because it does not have a specific thing outside of weakness to magic. So if I hit something with like a fire spell and then I have weakness to fire and weakness to magic, both of those debuffs scale the damage. So for that reason, I don't think it's as strong as like an S tier damage source, but it still is pretty decent. Next we have damage Magicka. Now damage Magicka is very similar to damage fatigue in that it just siphons magic off of something. I would say it's C tier. It's not going to be winning you fights for the most part. The enemies that are big magical threats tend to want to be nuked down anyways, so you could damage their Magicka to deplete it, but it's not really that big of an effect. It might even be D tier. The next effect we have is Disintegrate Armor. Disintegrate Armor is a pretty decent effect for leveling your armor, but outside of that, in combat, it doesn't really do anything, so I'm putting it in C tier. You pretty much only want to cast this to damage your own armor so that you can max out your armor pretty quickly. Outside of that, it doesn't really do anything in combat. It does damage enemy armor, which in theory reduces their armor value slightly, but it doesn't reduce it enough to actually give you huge, meaningful damage. Next, we have Disintegrate Weapon. Kind of the same story. I would say it's worse than Disintegrate Armor. If you spam Disintegrate Weapon, all it does is it damages a weapon, which in the case of using it on an enemy is not very good at all. You can just kill them. Or if you use it on yourself to power level armor, it's just worse than Disintegrate Armor, so I don't really think it's that valuable. Next we have Drain Fatigue. Now Drain Fatigue is another one of those like crowd control effects where if you ramp it, it can be used to knock enemies over. I would say it's probably about as good as Damage Fatigue. Now as far as I know, you can only get it to 100, but if you ramp it, it should spike up pretty high, and the base cost is quite low. It might even be better than Damage Fatigue. I haven't really run it, but I'm aware that you can use it to knock enemies over, so I'll put it in A tier for that reason. Next we have Drain Health. Drain Health, this will be in low S tier. This can be used in combination with a nuke spell to deal a big chunk of temporary damage. What the effect of Drain Health does is it reduces the max HP of something by the amount. So if you ramp it, it usually gives you bonus damage. Now, if you want to kill with just Drain Health, you're going to have a hard time doing that because it only scales off of weakness to Magicka, or weakness to magic. But if you want to add this to like a really powerful nuke, it doesn't really cost that much to add 100 points. So for that reason, I would say it's like low S tier. Next, we have Drain Magicka. I would say Drain Magicka is probably around here, like C tier. I don't think it's really that good. I wouldn't really recommend running it. There's really no point in running it. If you do find there to be a point, definitely let me know, but I don't really see it. It's still useful in that you can shut a mage down. Next we have Drain Skill. Drain Skill, I want to put in D tier. Maybe there's a use case where it helps, but if you're casting these effects, like if we're running destruction magic, why even bother wasting Magicka on these effects when we can just kill the enemy? That's kind of where my thinking is going for like these utility effects. It's like, yes, you can knock them down, but you can also just kill them. So it really depends on how you play the game. Next we have Fire Damage. Fire Damage is easily S tier. Its base cost is 7.5, so it's on the lower end. But generally speaking, fire nukes deal huge damage and you can easily ramp it to be pretty insane. Next, we have Frost. Now, Frost is the cheapest element. It's marginally cheaper, 7.4 versus Fire's 7.5. So if you want to have the cheapest enchantments, the cheapest spells, Frost damage is the way to go. There aren't that many enemies that are resistant to Frost, but if you use Weakness to Frost, you can bypass resistances anyways. But Frost is overall pretty strong. Next, we have Shock. So Shock is more expensive than Fire and Frost, but it still is strong. There are a few Daedra that are specifically weak to Shock. For the elements, honestly, it depends on your preference. Frost is the most efficient, Fire damage is not that much farther behind, and Shock damage is slightly more expensive than both, but all of them are good. I've run all of them in different runs, and you really don't notice the difference in costs. You're talking like, you know, a few points of Magicka for a nuke, which is pretty negligible, but it's nice if you want to be as efficient as possible. Next, we have Weakness to Fire. So this is one of the effects. I would say this is actually better than the damage source itself, because this ramps your summons. If they have like fire attacks, this ramps your enchanted weapons. So this effect is actually straight up better than fire damage because it also works with other things, and it's also super cheap. So Weakness to Fire, generally insanely strong. Definitely want to run it. Even if you just run Destruction for the weakness effects are very powerful. Next, we have Weakness to Frost, kind of the same story. Now, you could argue it's slightly better because Frost damage is a little bit cheaper, and that would be fair. Also, I guess for the enchanting, Frost enchantments should be a little bit cheaper to enchant. And of course, there's Chill Rend, which is a pretty nice, like, high damage, self-ramping Weakness to Frost weapon. That's pretty good. So there's that as well. But similar to Weakness to Fire, it's better than the actual damage effect, because this is dealing damage through spells. These can ramp other things in addition to the spells, so they enable more, and without these effects, the actual damage itself is not that high. And then finally, we have Weakness to Shock, which we could rank as the worst, even though it's like the worst of the best, right? Like, it's still high S tier, completely game-winning, but it's the worst of top 3 effects in the game, potentially. Next, we have Weakness to Magic. So Weakness to Magic is arguably better than the rest because it ramps all of them, and it combos with literally all magic that is offensive, including like Absorb and things like this. So this is like the great enabler. This is arguably one of the best spell effects in the entire game. It ramps anything magical, including other skill trees, which is kind of crazy, like other skills. So if you want to ramp Absorb or like some kind of Restoration nuke or something like that, or just generally any effects, it also ramps the other ramps. So like if I have Weakness to Magic 100 and then I hit an enemy with Weakness to Fire on a separate spell, what will happen is the Weakness to Magic will amplify the Weakness to Fire, putting it at 200% if it was 100%. So this amplifies these and is better than them because it also scales them higher. So in terms of like hierarchy, Weakness to Magic is definitely the best. And then the Weakness to Elements, you use both of them, but these ramp off of this, so this enables them to be even stronger. Without Weakness to Magic, Weakness to Elements are just decent, and you could just do like single layers of like 100% and then cast a second spell to get another 100% on there, and then you hit an enemy for like 200%. But if you add Weakness to Magic with your Weakness to Element, it gets you an insane amount of damage that is arguably game-breaking. Finally, we have Weakness to Poison. Weakness to Poison is very cheap. So if you want to run just like a poison build, you can have very low destruction and still get away with running Weakness to Poison. But if you have 100 destruction, you can cast like a 10-second Weakness to Poison for like 14 magic, which is pretty, or 14 Magicka, which is very strong. Arguably, this is worse than the other things, because poison requires that you have a poison in your inventory, that you apply that poison, and that you land an attack with a poison. Whereas with the elements, you can be dealing elemental damage through enchantments, through a staff, through a spell, through a summon, through an ally, whatever. This is less powerful than these, but it's still very powerful. So if you're running any kind of poison, Weakness to Poison just ramps it. It also allows you to bypass enemies with poison immunity. So if there's like a ghost or a skeleton or something undead or something, and you hit them with Weakness to Poison 100, you bypass poison immunity, can now apply poison. The other thing to know about Weakness to Poison is that if you have a poison that lasts for, let's say, 20 seconds, and you have a poison weakness effect for like 10, as long as you apply that poison damage over time while they are ramped with weakness to poison. If the weakness to poison expires, the damage is still ramped from the poison. So you could have like a 5-second weakness to poison and then hit an enemy with like a 30-second poison. And as long as you hit them within 5 seconds of that weakness effect being cast on them, they will experience the ramped damage even though the weakness to poison has expired. So this is massive value for poison builds because you can cast like a cheap 3 to 5 second poison and then just like slap an enemy with a dagger with a poisoned weapon, like a poison strike, and then bypass poison resistance and also ramp the poison. And also just like with weakness to magic and weakness to element, you can use weakness to magic and then weakness to poison so that when you hit with weakness to poison, you can ramp its effect. So pretty powerful for that reason, really good for non-magical builds that just want to splash destruction for this effect or just to enchant with it. But overall, I would say most of the destruction effects are like S tier, with a lot of them being A tier, and then the situational or very situational ones kind of don't really come up as much. So it's really up to you as to how you want to use them. But let me toggle this off so you can see, because that's in the way. So weakness to magic, I would say, is the best effect, and then all the other weakness effects are like high S tier. And then the damage is also up there, but it does need ramp. So like without the ramp, the damage is just fine. It's maybe like B tier because you have to deal a lot of damage on Master Mode to actually kill. But with ramps, that's what we're assuming, the damage is definitely S tier. So that is it for this one. Definitely like and subscribe if you enjoyed this or found this useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.